Tonight, everyone is flipping on the Donald. First, his lawyer, then his ally at the Inquirer, now potentially the most damning of all, the CFO of the Trump Organization, and he knows, as they say, where all Trump's dollars are buried. Analysis on what happens next from former federal prosecutor Roland Riopelle. Then Governor Andrew Cuomo in battle mode, taking on President Trump, and also Preet Bharara. This as he uses the former U.S. attorney to try and clear his own name. And later, 6 months after Parkland and the Trump administration now looking for ways to make you pay to arm teachers. And they're doing it by avoiding Congress. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. I know this sounds like a broken record, but another huge day in the investigation of Donald Trump. Now, for a president whose relationship with the truth is often an inconvenient one, it is still possible every now and then to get a look inside Donald Trump's head, usually when he gets too comfortable and shares more than he should. It happened again yesterday morning on Where Else But Fox and Friends.
This whole thing about flipping, they call it. I know all about flipping. For 30, 40 years, I've been watching flippers. Everything's wonderful, and then they get 10 years in jail, and they flip on whoever the next highest one is, or as high as you can go. It almost ought to be outlawed. It's not fair.
Trump hates people who flip, maybe because so many of his closest former associates are now flipping on him. The fallout from the criminal investigation into President Trump's former personal attorney.
Mr. President, are you worried about Alan Weisselberg's immunity deal?
The president ignoring questions at the White House today after news broke about the Trump Organization's longtime chief financial officer. Sources say that Alan Weisselberg talked to federal prosecutors in the Cohen case. He was granted immunity, but sources say it doesn't appear Weisselberg helped the feds on any other matter. The CFO seen here next to Trump on The Apprentice, he is the second person we have learned this week who was offered a deal in exchange for information. A source says the news tabloid king and Trump ally David Pecker was given immunity, agreeing to give up information about Cohen and the president. Cohen pled guilty to campaign finance violations for hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels in 2016. According to court documents, Cohen and Pecker, publisher for the National Enquirer, worked together to silence Daniels and Playboy playmate Karen McDougal. Both claim they had sexual affairs with the president years before he ran for office. The documents also allege the two men came up with a plan in 2015 to catch and kill negative stories about Trump. The National Enquirer writing positive stories about Trump's 2016 run while trashing his opponents. The AP reports the tabloid even kept a safe containing documents related to the president. And one additional note, the New York State Attorney General and the Manhattan DA both reportedly considering criminal investigations into the Trump Organization, which is the group that cut Cohen's check here that was used to pay off Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels. So both Pecker and Weisselberg making deals with prosecutors and agreeing to cooperate. But those deals are only with the Southern District of New York and not with Robert Mueller, a distinction with a difference. And they're about the Michael Cohen case and reportedly not about Russia, collusion, obstruction, or anything else. Or are they? Let's get those answers here. And for that, I turn to who else but former federal prosecutor Roland Riopelle, who joins us live from Manhattan. Roland, I've heard a lot of folks, and I know you feel this way, that of all the developments, with the verdicts even that we saw with Manafort, with the plea deal that we saw from Cohen, with what we saw just yesterday from Pecker over at the Inquirer, etc., all of those, you believe, are a distant second or third to the significance of today that we learned that Weisselberg got a complete immunity deal and he's cooperating with the investigation.
Yes, Richard, I in a typical white-collar case, and nothing about this case is typical, but in the typical case, when the accountant has got an immunity deal to testify against his client or the boss, you're nearer to the end of you're at the beginning of the end, not the end of the beginning. Mr. Weisselberg has worked for the Trump family and the Trump Organization for 40-something years. He knows everything about those tax returns that Donald Trump has been so afraid to turn over to the press. He knows everything about the Trump Foundation, which is clearly a running sore for the Trump family, and everything else. And indeed, he is mentioned by name in the tape recording that we heard where Mr. Cohen says to Trump, "I've talked to Alan Weisselberg about how to structure the deal where we'll get the money to Stormy Daniels and you'll reimburse me." So Mr. Weisselberg is just a treasure trove of information about Mr. Trump's finances. And given what we know about Mr. Trump's finances in the public record, he knows a treasure trove about financial improprieties.
Well, to that end, though,
see.
Roland, to that end, we're hearing competing accounts, which is Weisselberg is either limiting the questions to him strictly to the Cohen payments here and whether there was a campaign finance violation, and others are saying, no, this is not limited to just that. How do you believe this immunity deal worked, and what was it designed to cover?
A witness as critical as Weisselberg to an investigation like the one that the Southern District is doing of Mr. Trump, and indeed the investigations that the New York County District Attorney's Office and the New York State Attorney General's Office are now doing with respect to Mr. Trump. These are fairly broad-ranging investigations. They are going to go into Mr. Trump's finances, wherever the documents that Cohen had may lead them. And so, I don't think that Mr. Weisselberg's immunity deal with the Southern District would limit his testimony to only the campaign finance issue. There were 7 million documents seized from Mr. Cohen, a lot of which had to do with Mr. Trump's finances, and I don't think the Southern District would forego its opportunity to ask Mr. Weisselberg about every one of those documents.
Now, explain for the audience why the Southern District of New York bringing this is a distinction with a difference than Bob Mueller and the feds doing it, and also how that could open up state charges.
Yes, this is another example of the way in which Mr. Mueller and his team were incredibly careful and incredibly smart about the way they operated. I'll remind the viewers that many months ago, Mr. Trump made the statement that if Mr. Mueller looked into Mr. Trump's finances, that was going to be a red line that he would never tolerate Mr. Mueller crossing, and that would be when he fired Mr. Mueller. Well, Mr. Mueller, when he heard about this campaign finance stuff, when he began to learn of that, he knew that was Mr. Trump's finances. It was not directly related to his Russia probe, and he very wisely laid this aspect of the case off to the Southern District of New York, which then executed the search warrant and discovered all of the evidence that was used to pummel Mr. Cohen into a guilty plea. But that evidence is full, I am sure, of evidence about Mr. Trump's finances, which Mr. Trump has said would be off limits for Mr. Mueller. But the Southern District is independent of Mr. Mueller, so it's going to go wild with that stuff.
You had a couple.
And it can then refer some of its findings and share its findings with the proper court authorization, with the AG's office, with the DA's office, and they're looking into Trump financial issues as well.
You came away with a couple interesting observations about what today told you beyond what Weisselberg may or may not actually exposed. You said it now clears up why Cohen didn't get a cooperating agreement here, and he's still likely going to get some time. You also point out this also explains why Jeff Sessions decided to stand a little taller yesterday and push back on Trump, because he knows it's closing in on the president and he doesn't have as much to fear. So you also say
that's right.
The reason why this agreement, this immunity agreement, was as broad as it was because everybody, at least within Trump world, knows This guy's got everything. And if he's got this, in addition to Pecker, in addition to Cohen, in addition to God knows what else they have, really the president's got nowhere to go but crazy after this, and people are going to start losing jobs. We're going to have a Sunday night or Saturday night massacre redo pretty soon. That's why they needed to get this guy cooperating, everything up on the table, not draw it out over 3-4 weeks.
I think that's right, Richard. You know, Mr. Weisselberg, who, you know, my gut tells me has been involved in any number of matters of financial legerdemain and probably ultimately crimes himself with Mr. Trump. In the ordinary case, he would get a cooperation agreement. And who needs Michael Cohen if Alan Weisselberg's cooperating with you? Michael Cohen is small potatoes compared to Mr. Weisselberg. But getting that and negotiating that's going to be, may even be months to do. I think the people involved realized that once it became clear that Weisselberg was cooperating and providing information to the government, the likelihood that Trump will do something absolutely wacky increases. And so they needed to get Weisselberg on board as fast as possible, get his information as fast as possible, and now I think they're going to try to strike some very difficult blows for Mr. Trump quickly.
And I just want people to process this. If you've learned anything over the last 2.5 years, since campaign Trump and now President Trump, he has the loyalty of a flea. He will turn on anyone at the first opportunity. And just think, if you're Michael Cohen, if you're Alan Weisselberg, if you're anyone else, especially people who for the better part of a decade, in the case of Weisselberg, 40 years, have seen him do this act, you know this is a race to the courthouse here, and you're pretty motivated to look out for number one because you know the president will do the same. Roland, I have a feeling it will be a very interesting week ahead of us, and we're in a scary situation because you have a desperate president.
Yes, and Richard, I'm afraid I may need to set up a cot here at the TV studio and just be ready to go on a moment's notice.
Please do, Roland. Hey, thank you very much. Might be a short weekend, but thank you. I appreciate the time as always, my friend.
Okay, Richard, give me a call. Thanks. Good to be here.
Count on that. All right. After the break, we're going to shift gears and focus on New York and a couple of issues connected to Governor Andrew Cuomo. He claims the Percoco conviction showed the governor was clean, but he bumped heads with a well-known prosecutor in the process. And should he really be campaigning against President Trump basically 24/7, or should he worry a little bit about his challenges for governor and the challenges facing New York State? But first, we share with you some heartbreaking news, and it comes from the world of politics on the national stage. Senator John McCain, he is ending his treatment for brain cancer. The senator's family making that announcement today. In a statement, they note the former presidential nominee has already outlived many of the predictions for someone with his diagnosis. But they noted the progress of disease and the inexorable advance of age render their verdict. It is assumed that McCain is now entering the final stages of his exemplary life. McCain, 81 years old. We'll be right back.